6 minutes. Mr. Perkins, I understand you're leading us off. You have the floor for 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses. And it's always a pleasure to see witnesses that have a strong family connection to the beautiful South Shore of Nova Scotia that I represent. So thank you for being here. As you've no doubt been following the hearings on the controversy around the conflicts of interest of board directors and the chair for more than the last year, you'll be aware perhaps that the former minister responsible for the appointment of the chair in question, Annette Basharian, former Minister Baines, appeared before the Industry Committee, and he said 9 times that he received the short list of candidates, 2 candidates from the PCO, that he basically claimed that he had nothing to do with it. There was a committee of PCO, PMO, he said, with some departmental officials. So who in PCO and who in PMO told him to interview the 2 shortlisted candidates that were given to him, one of which was Ms. Vacherian?
Mr. Chair, as the honourable member has advised, the role of PCO is to, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, is to provide recommendations to the responsible minister. In this case, as the honourable member has mentioned, it would have been Minister Baines at the time. He would have been provided by PCO after a full assessment process, as I described in our opening remarks, with suitable candidates that would have been eligible for the position. I will admit that once we hand that over to our colleagues in the Prime Minister's office, or to the Minister, I should say, that we don't have line of sight into what kind of conversations happen or what kind of further engagement ministers may or may not have with
when
candidates.
You hand it off to the Prime Minister's office, that would be the appointment secretariat in the Prime Minister's office?
So yes, I apologize, Mr. Chair. I made a little faux pas. We would have provided a letter of advice, a formal letter of advice to the minister. It would have contained names of qualified candidates, and at that point, it would be up to the minister, working with his office, to determine the choice of candidate that he would recommend for cabinet.
Right, but that wasn't my question. My question was who in PMO was involved in that process with regard to Ms. Vacherian's appointment of the 2 candidates?
So, Mr. Chair, the Prime Minister's office obviously works closely with us. They are members of the selection process, and I couldn't speak to what kind of engagement they would have with the Minister's office or the Minister.
It would be fair to say whoever heads the PMO appointment secretariat would have been involved. Who was that?
Back at that time, Mr. Chair, the individual that was responsible for the PMO secretariat would have been a woman by the name of Hilary Leftick, who I think moved on in 2020.
Now, in the Ethics Commissioner's report, the Ethics Commissioner interviewed Mrs. Vacherian, and essentially the first time she had heard of this was when the minister's office phoned her to ask her if she would be chair. And my knowledge, based on the testimony of the former president, Ms. Lawrence, that she was told that the chair at the time, Jim Bilsilli, had to be out, and they were replacing him with someone else, and they gave him about 7 days' notice that he was out. It's pretty clear to me that Ms. Vacherian didn't apply. Is that true, that she was approached but hadn't actually applied in the transparent process that Minister Baines outlined that was here, that you apply and then get it, that she had actually been approached to apply?
Mr. Chair, I would say that I will be a bit cautious in terms of the level of detail I'm able to give on individuals to protect their personal information. Much of what is known about Ms. Vacherian's application and her tenure is in the Ethics Commissioner's report, so we can rely on that to some extent.
So okay, you can't say that. I do have limited time, so I apologize for interrupting, but Ms. Lawrence was told that by the powers that be that informed her that they were choosing Ms. Vacherian after she objected to her conflict of interest and put that through the system through ADM Noseworthy, that they would manage conflicts. Ms. Vacherian had companies that she had a conflict with had already received about $12 million from the Green Slush Fund before she was appointed. And then while on the board, her stated conflict of interest companies received almost $36 million while chair of the board. So I'm curious who in PCO or PMO told ADM Noseworthy or the Deputy Minister of the Day or Minister Baines that it was okay to have the first chair in the history of SDTC appointed with conflicts. No other chair had had conflicts.
Mr. Chair, to respond to the honourable member's question, I would say, as the Ethics Commissioner noted in his report, that at the time of her application, Ms. Verschuren was advised by the Privy Council Office, given the nature of the conflicts, to speak directly with the Commissioner, and that's very clearly laid out in the Commissioner's report. And it was the Commissioner who felt that there were ways to mitigate the conflicts that she had, and it was on that basis that advice would have been provided at the time, that she would have been in good standing from a legislative perspective to hold the role.
So it is the policy then of this Prime Minister's office that appointing people with known conflict of interest, whose companies have an interest, financial interest in the company that they're being appointed to, the Crown Agency with taxpayers' money, that conflict is okay by this Prime Minister's office to be basically breaking what appears to be not only the word and intent of the Conflict of Interest Act and the SDTC Act, which say that not only the real conflict but the appearance of conflict cannot happen, that you cannot personally benefit from being on these boards. But when...
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. I will allow an answer. Your time is up. Go ahead, please, Ms. McClement.
Mr. Chair, I would say that the basic premise, I would argue, of the Conflict of Interest Act that Parliament would have passed, I think back in the 90s, is to ensure that members of Parliament, that people across the country who want to serve the country have ways to do so that can mitigate potential conflicts. And I think, for all intents and purposes, from our perspective, at the appointment's time, and the Conflict of Interest Commissioner has underscored this, there were ways to do that here. I think part of the question was that process totally respected?
Thank you very much.